Okay, this is practice exam number 4, and I'm going to solve some problems, starting with number 1 here. It has n squared, notice. So we have a certain strategy. When we have x squared or n squared with an equal sign, we have a game plan we always follow. Number 1, it's get a 0. Number 2, factor, which means like parentheses. Number 3, each part equals 0. That's the game plan we always follow. You want to put that on your 3x5 card. Put this on your, put that over here. This should be on your 3x5 card for our next exam. So as soon as you see x squared, you think, oh yeah, it's the sea monster. I've called it the sea monster before. When the sea monster rears its ugly head, when x squared suddenly shows up, you think, okay, got to get a 0. Well, we've already got a 0. That's done. Step 2, factor. Now, what do we mean by factor? Well, there's 2 ways to factor. See how this one down here, it's going to be similar, has 3 terms? When you have 3 terms, that's when you do 2 parentheses for your factoring. But this, it doesn't have 3 terms. It only has 2. So what? Well, that means that really we should be looking for what they have in common. What's the GCF? What goes into 90 and into 12? Now, you might think 2 right away, but that's not right. Let me show you how that's not right. 2 and then, of course, n. They both have an n, right? So that would leave 45n plus 6n equals 0. Don't write that down. That's not right. How do you know that's not right? Well, look at 45 and 6. They have more in common. 3 goes into both of those. You can check with your calculator. 3 goes into both those, which means what? Which means you didn't get all the commonness out. 2 was not enough. You got to take more out than 2. Well, then what? 6, it turns out. Use your calculator and you'll find that 6 goes into 90 and 6 goes into 12. 6 is the greatest amount they have in common. So divide. Now, how do you know what goes inside? You got to divide this by 6 and divide this by 6. 6 times what? 15. 6n times 15n. Remember, factoring, what I'm doing now, factoring, is just multiplying backwards. So 6n times 15n, that will go back to 90n squared, so I know it's right. And then 6n times what? 2n. Oh, not 2n, that'd be 12n squared. Just regular 2, huh? Not an n there. Just regular 2 will go back to 12n, won't it? That's what factoring is. It's backwards multiplying. So whenever you factor, whenever you take out a GCF, something in common, you double check. You multiply to make sure it goes back. All right. So we got it. It's going back. Now, what do we do? So that's step number 2 is factor. Step 3, each one gets their own 0. Why? Because if 2 things times, right, those parentheses mean multiply, 6n is timesing 15n plus 2. If 2 things times, 2 things multiply, and they equal 0, that means either one could be 0, right? If 2 things are multiplying to come out 0, either one could be 0 to make them multiply and be 0. When you times 2 things, if one of them is 0, the answer will be 0. So either one, either the 6n or the 15n plus 2, either one could be 0. So now, how do I finish solving? This is divide by 6. N equals 0 over 6. That's just 0. This one, subtract 2 from both sides. We get 15n is negative 2. Divide by 15. Negative 2/15 and 0. There it is. Answer B. Okay, let's go on to question number 2. Going to need a fresh screen here. Question number 2. Same thing. We got n squared or b squared. Same game plan. What's step number 1? Get a 0. When you have x squared, step 1 is get a 0. So that means I need to add 9 to both sides. So I get 15b squared plus 32b plus 16, right? 9 and 7 is 16 equals 0. So that makes 0 on the right side. So that gives me my 0. That's step 1. Step 2 is factor. Now, this is a hard factoring one. First off, what about a GCF? Is there something that goes into 15, 32, and 16? No, nothing. Right? 2 goes into 32 and 16, but 2 doesn't go into 15. Nothing goes into all three. There's nothing in common. They don't all have a B. The 16 doesn't have a B. So there's no letter in common. There's no number in common. It's not that kind of factoring. It's the two parenthesis kind of factoring is what it is. Because there's three terms. When you have three terms, 1, 2, 3, you got to do the two parenthesis kind of factoring. How do we do it? Well, it's all about FOIL. Remember FOIL? Basically, it's first, outer, inner, last. You want to say, or if it helps, another way I could put it. Let me, yeah, let's just leave it like that. So first times first to make 15b squared. 5b, 3b. The first one in this parenthesis times the first one in that parenthesis will make the first one here, 15b squared. Now, last times last to make 16. What times what's 16? Well, there's some options. Could be 4 times 4. Could be 8 times 2. How do you know what you want? Well, it's basically whatever works. How do you know what works? Well, you just try it. Put plus signs in there and see if it's right. Try it. Take the 5b and go boom, boom. FOIL it out. Let's see what we get. That'd be 15b squared. 5b times 3b. Now 5b times 4. That'd be 20b. Okay, he's done. Now this one goes to both. Plus 12b. Plus 16. What does that come out to be? These two in the middle make 32b. So it's right. It's the right. So I'll just check that. You don't need that anymore. That was just to check, make sure it's right. Okay, so that was step 2. Factor. I factored. Now step 3. Each parenthesis gets their own 0. So this, right, because if two things are timesing to equal 0, that means either one could be 0. So 5b plus 4 equals 0, or 3b plus 4 equals 0. Either part could equal 0. Then you just solve. So jump the 4 over there. It's 5b is minus 4 divided by 5. Minus 4 fifths. Jump the 4 over there. 3b is minus 4 divided by 3. Minus 4 thirds. So minus 4 fifths and minus 4 thirds. Looks like it's b. So there we go. B again, I think, right? So there we go. All right, let's go on to number 3. Okay, let's try number 3 here. Length of a rectangular frame is 6 centimeters more than the width. Area inside is 55. Find the width. Actually, why don't we move on and come back to this one? Oh, actually, we'll solve it. Let's go ahead and solve it. So we're talking about area. So what's the area formula for a rectangle? Space inside a rectangle. Width, length. So area is length times width. Okay, and it says the length. Notice what it says right here. The length is, so L is 6 added to width. So we have two formulas. So the area 55, let me plug that in right here. So this will be 55 is length times width. Area is 55. And length is 6 plus W, 6 more than width. Right? 6 more than width. Okay, so what does that mean we can do now? I can take this and plug it right in there, can't I? Plug it right in for L. So what do we get then? We get 55 equals L. But L is 6 plus W times the width. You see how that works? Right? So the length is 6 plus W. So I plugged in for L, 6 plus W. Now, we can distribute like this, and we get 55 is 6W plus W squared. And as soon as we see that, that's the sea monster. All of a sudden reared its ugly head. Remember what happens when we have W squared with an equals or X squared? Step 1, get a 0. Step 2, factor with the parentheses. Step 3, each one gets its own 0. All right, So let's get on it. So we got to get a 0. So step 1, whenever you see x squared or w squared, get a 0. So I'm going to jump this 55 over to here. That'll put 0 on this, and I'm going to rearrange these, put the w squared first, then the 6w, and the 55 will be negative because it jumped to the other side. So that was step 1, get a 0. Step 2, factor. Remember how to factor this one with the 2 parentheses? What multiplies and what adds? You always multiply to be the back number. So what times what's 55? 5 times 11. Right? And how does it add to be 6? The sign that's in the middle always goes on the bigger. Plus on the 11, minus on the 5. All right? And then, so that's step 2, factor. And then step 3, set each one to 0, right? They each get their own 0. So w minus 5 gets its own 0, and w plus 11 gets its own 0. And then jump it to the other side, jump it to the other side. They just change signs, don't they? Plus 5, minus 11. Now you can't have a width that's negative in the real world, so the width must be 5. That's all they want on this one. They said, find the width. So the width must be 5. That's none of the above. It's kind of disturbing. The width is 5. What if we did need the length? What if they did ask me for the length? I could take this formula here that we have length is 6 plus w, and I could plug the 5 in right there for w, and the length would be 11 if needed. By the way, notice it's the opposite of the answer we threw away. That almost always happens. Not always. You can't always count on it, but usually. So the width is 5. We threw away the negative because widths and lengths can't be negative, but it turns out that is the other positive answer. The length is 11. There we go. Okay, so here's number 4 now. Talking about a right triangle, what formula do we use when they talk about a right triangle? Let me just draw a little right triangle here. We use a squared plus b squared is c squared, the Pythagorean theorem. And so this is a, b. C is the hypotenuse, C is the longest side. See how that side's longer? Here's the right angle. The a and the b are called the legs of the triangle. These are the legs. They're not as long. And the hypotenuse is the longest side. Okay, the shorter leg measures 120. So this one's 120. The hypotenuse is 40 longer than the longer. So this hypotenuse is 40 plus x, and this is x. Did you track with that? 40 longer, 40 plus x, that's hypotenuse, and the other one is x. Remember, one of the three is always simple x. Okay, let's plug them in. X squared plus 120 squared is x plus 40 squared. Oops, I didn't do a very good square here. There we go. See how that's working there? The C, the hypotenuse, has to be the one over here. It's the biggest, so the other two add up to equal it. It's the biggest. It's got to be the C. The A and the B, you could swap the order. You put the 120 first, then the x. Doesn't matter. All right, here we go. X squared plus this will be 14400 equals. Now, this is just x squared, and this is 16 squared. Wrong. Watch out for that. I see that mistake a lot. You can't just square the x, square the 40. Instead what? You have to actually write 2 parentheses like this and then FOIL that whole thing out. So watch out when there's a 2 on parentheses. You got to write 2 parentheses and FOIL. Why is there a 2? Where'd the parentheses come from? Well, because I'm supposed to square C. That's what the original formula says, square C. And C is this whole thing. So you got to put parentheses to indicate you're squaring all of C. And then square on a parentheses, 2 parentheses. FOIL it out, x squared plus 40x plus 40x plus 1600. All right. Let's gather some like terms here. 40x and 40x is 80x. Now notice we have x squared and x squared on both sides. here's the wall. What does that mean? We're going to drop them out, right? When you have the same amount of x squared, or of anything, on both sides of an equation, it's gone. Just subtract it from both sides. So 14,400 is 80x plus 1,600. Now that's really good news, because now this thing is no longer an x squared equation. It's not the sea monster. The sea monster died. He appeared here and we cut his head off. There's no more x squared. It's no longer. It's just x to the first power now. There's no x squared left. So that means I don't have to do that whole song and dance, those 3 steps, get a zero factor, all that stuff. It's not required. It's just get x alone. It's just x to the first. No big deal. Get it alone. Subtract 1,600 from both sides. So let me use my calculator here. I'm getting, what is that, 12,800. This is 80x. Last step to get x alone, divide by 80 on both sides, and I'm getting 160. So x is 160. Oh, careful, is that, what are they asking for? Let's go back, word problem, you always got to be careful. Go back and answer the question that they're actually asking you for. How long is the longer leg? What's that? Yeah, that's x. So that's a leg. It's enough they asked, so it is 160. That's the answer. It's not here. How disturbing. None of the above. But if they had asked for the hypotenuse, they didn't. But if they'd asked for the hypotenuse, I would have needed to plug the 160 in right there. 160 plus 40, that would have been 200, which is answer A. But they did not ask for the hypotenuse. They asked for the longer leg, so it's just x. It's just 160. It's not there. So none of the above. There we go. Okay, let's do question number 9. I'm going to take a jump here. I jumped to question 9. We'll come back to some of those other ones. All right, question number 9. R squared plus 16r plus 64, comma. Notice that comma, which means this other part's separate. R squared plus 8r. So we have 2 separate things we're looking at, and we want to find the LCM. You know what we got to do first? We got to factor. This is 2 parentheses, r. What multiplies and adds? What multiplies to be 64, 8 times 8, and adds to be 16? It does. R plus 8, R plus 8. You can check it. If you're not sure, check it. Now, when you have 2 identical twins, what does that mean? You got to make it squared, right? And then the other one, how do you factor that? Careful. Take out GCF first. R is in common, huh? Take out an R like that. Okay, now we're looking at this and looking at this, and we want to form the LCM. How do you do it? What do you do for the LCM? Remember the rule for LCM? It's like you're shopping at the store. You're going to take 1 of every type to the highest power. 1 of every type. So I'm going to take r plus 8 squared and take that plain r and that r plus 8 squared. Why didn't I take this r plus 8? Well, because I already got him right here, and I take the high. This is just first power. I take the higher one, the 2 power. You don't take them both. You just take 1 of every type, 1 plain r, 1 r plus 8, but the highest of each type. That's how you do LCM. It's the highest of each type. Only 1 of each type, the highest of each type. So that's hopefully there somewhere. Yeah, it's answer A. We got it. Let's go on to number 10. So number 10, how do we do number 10? We got a factor. This is fractions added. So let me write the steps over here. When you're adding, subtracting, fractions, add, subtract. What do you got to do? Step 1, factor denoms. Step 2, so let's do that first. Let's go over here, we got to factor these denoms. So how do you factor this? Well, that's the 2 parenthesis kind of thing. What's it going to be? Y and Y. Oops. What? Let's come over here. What multiplies to be 2, adds to be minus 3. 2 times 1. Both negative. That way they'll add to be negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, and they multiply, they times to be plus 2, right? 2 negatives multiply to be positive. 2, but they add to be negative 3. Okay. And then factor, how do you factor y squared minus 1? Hopefully you know that one. Y plus 1, y minus 1. By the way, you can look at these guys and say, hey, look, there's a clue to how these things might factor, you know. Okay, so let's keep going. We factor denominators. That was step 1. Step 2, multiply top and bottom by whatever is missing. You know, parentheses. So I go to this one and I go top and bottom by what's missing. What do I mean what's missing? Compare this one to that one. What's he missing? What is this? This has a y plus 1. So I got to give him y plus 1 top and bottom. What about this? What is this guy missing over here? Y minus 2 that the other guy had. See how they now have the same three things? I filled them in and made the two denominators the same. Do you see that? And I did it top and bottom. Top and bottom. So now step 3 is multiply out the tops and combine. So now multiply, boom, boom, 4y plus 4, and then boom, boom, plus 7y minus 14 over y plus 1, y minus 2, y minus 1. Okay, combine now. 4y and 7y is 11y. 4 minus 14 is minus 10 over y plus 1, y minus 2, y minus 1. So where is that? Is that answer A? Yeah, it looks like answer A up there. I can hardly read it. Just a different order in the bottom. That's fine. The order doesn't matter. So that's it. Answer A. Oh, step 4 I should write. There is a step 4. Try to factor the top and reduce. So you see how you can't factor that top. There's no way to factor that, so we're done. That's how I know we didn't. Usually you don't even need to do step 4, usually, but not always. There we go.